The winter of 1889 had arrived early in the Dakota Territory, bringing with it a savage cold that froze the breath in a man's lungs and turned the mountain passes into death traps. Snow fell in thick curtains across the landscape, obliterating trails and landmarks, leaving only the howling wind to guide the foolish or desperate who dared venture into the wilderness. Elias Gray stood at the edge of the ridge, his weathered duster coat whipping in the wind, watching the storm clouds gather over Deadwood. The town lay nestled in the valley below, its scattered lights barely visible through the swirling snow. He'd made this journey down from his mountain cabin only out of necessity. His supplies of powder and medicine were running dangerously low, and another month of isolation lay ahead. He was a man who belonged to shadows and silence, standing just over 6 feet with shoulders broadened by years of hard living. His face, weathered by 40-odd winters, bore the marks of too many fights and too little peace. Gray eyes, fitting for a man named Gray, watched the world with the cold calculation of someone who'd learned long ago that trust got you killed faster than a rattlesnake's strike. The Colt .45 at his hip had seen more use than most men's Bibles, and the Winchester rifle slung across his back was as much a part of him as his own scarred hands. The cabin he'd built 3 years back sat high in the mountains, far from the reach of law and farther still from the memories that haunted him. It wasn't much. Logs chinked with mud, a stone fireplace, and a door thick enough to stop a bullet. But it was his. Up there, the ghosts of the men he'd killed couldn't find him. Or so he told himself on the nights when the wind sounded like dying screams. The journey down took the better part of a day, his horse picking carefully through the treacherous paths. By the time he reached the outskirts of Deadwood, dusk was falling, and with it came an orange glow that didn't belong to any sunset. Smoke rose black and thick from the direction of the church. Elias reined in his horse, studying the scene with the detached interest of a man who'd seen too much destruction to be moved by it. The church, a modest wooden structure that had stood at the town's edge, was nothing but charred timbers and glowing embers. The cross that had topped its steeple lay twisted in the snow, black with soot. He might have ridden on, might have continued to the general store for his supplies and left the town to its grief. But the sound of rough voices carried on the wind, men's voices, harsh with liquor and violence, and beneath them, barely audible, a woman's cry. Elias dismounted, tying his horse to a frost-covered fence post. His boots made no sound in the fresh snow as he moved closer, keeping to the shadows cast by the burning church. Through the smoke and falling snow, he could make out 4 figures, 3 men, all armed, circling a 4th figure who knelt in the snow. "Ain't so high and mighty now, are you?" The largest of the men, his face hidden by a week's worth of beard and a hat pulled low, kicked snow at the kneeling figure. "Your husband thought he could preach against Ben Morrison's business dealings. Look where that got him." The kneeling figure, a woman. Elias could see now, raised her head, even from a distance. He could make out the dark stain of blood on her dress, the defiant tilt of her chin despite her position. "My husband was a good man," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "He spoke the truth about your employer's land grabs and murdered homesteaders." The second man, lean as a whip with pistols on both hips, laughed. "Truth. Only truth that matters out here is who's got the fastest gun and the deepest pockets. Your husband learned that lesson too late." Enough talking." The third man growled. He was younger than the others, nervous energy radiating from every movement. Morrison said to make sure she couldn't testify, "Let's finish this and get out of here before someone comes." Elias had heard enough. These weren't his problems. This wasn't his fight. He'd given up playing hero years ago, after too many grateful folks had turned around and put a price on his head. But something about the woman's straight spine, the way she faced death without begging, stirred something he'd thought long dead. He stepped out from the shadows, his duster pushed back to reveal the Colt at his hip. 3 against 1, and that one being a woman, hardly seemed sporting. The men spun toward him, hands moving toward their weapons. The bearded one squinted through the smoke and snow. This ain't your business, stranger. Ride on while you still can. Made it my business when I rode up, Elias replied, his voice as cold as the wind cutting across the churchyard. The lady's coming with me. Like hell she is, the lean man snarled, his hands hovering over his pistols. You know who we work for? Ben Morrison owns half this territory. You kill us, you'll have 100 men hunting you by dawn. Elias smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Wouldn't be the first 100. The younger man lost his nerve first. Jerking his gun from its holster, Elias drew and fired in one smooth motion. The Colt speaking once, the boy spun and fell, his pistol firing harmlessly into the ground before the echo died. Elias had shifted his aim to the lean man, who was faster than most, but not fast enough. 2 shots, center mass, and he crumpled like a marionette with cut strings. The bearded man had his gun half drawn when Elias's bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. A second shot dropped him to his knees. He knelt there in the snow, pressing his hand to the spreading red stain on his coat. You're Elias Gray, he gasped, recognition and fear flooding his eyes. The Widowmaker. Thought you were dead. Lot of people make that mistake, Elias said, keeping his gun trained on the wounded man. You still can. Ride out. Don't come back. Tell Morrison his business here is done. The man struggled to his feet, clutching his shoulder. He looked at his dead companions, then at Elias, and apparently decided living was worth more than Morrison's gold. He stumbled toward the horses tied nearby, pulled himself into the saddle with a grunt of pain, and spurred the animal into the gathering darkness. Elias holstered his Colt and turned to the woman. She'd risen to her feet during the gunfight, and now stood swaying slightly, one hand pressed to her side where blood seeped between her fingers. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 30 years, with dark hair that had come loose from its pins and eyes the color of autumn leaves. Beautiful, in the way a blade was beautiful, sharp and dangerous and utterly unaware of it. You're hurt, he said. I'll manage, she replied, but her legs betrayed her, buckling. He caught her before she hit the ground, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. My husband, she whispered, looking toward the burning church. He's gone, Elias said, not unkindly. Nothing you can do for him now? Tears tracked through the soot on her face, but she nodded. I know, I saw them. I saw what they did. You got somewhere to go? Family? Friends? She laughed, bitter and short. A pastor's widow with no children and a reputation for speaking her mind? This town tolerated me for Samuel's sake. Now? She gestured weakly at the burning church. They'll be glad to see me gone. Elias looked down at her, decision warring in his mind. He'd kept to himself for 3 years, nursing his solitude like a man nurses a bottle. Taking her with him meant complications, meant another person in his space. Meant hell. It meant a lot of things he wasn't ready to think about. But leaving her here meant death, either from her wounds or from Morrison's men when they came back. I've got a place, he heard himself saying. Up in the mountains. It's not much, but it's safe. You can stay until you heal. Figure out what comes next. She studied him through pain-hazed eyes. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Don't know you, he agreed. But I knew men like them. He nodded toward the 2 bodies cooling in the snow. And I've got no love for Ben Morrison. That's reason enough. I don't even know your name. Elias Gray. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or fear. Most folks who'd heard his name had one reaction or the other. But she simply nodded. Miriam Hartley, widow of Pastor Samuel Hartley, who died trying to bring justice to this godless place. Well, Mrs. Hartley, we need to move. That one I let go will bring others, and you need tending. He helped her to his horse, lifted her into the saddle despite her protests that she could manage. She swayed dangerously, and he swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her steady. She stiffened at the contact, then relaxed slightly, perhaps recognizing necessity over propriety. "Your supplies," she murmured as they turned away from the town. "Can wait," he replied. "Getting you somewhere safe can't—" They rode into the storm, leaving behind the burning church and the cooling bodies. The snow fell heavier now, covering their tracks almost as soon as they made them. Miriam leaned back against him, her breathing shallow and pained. He could feel the warm wetness of her blood seeping through her dress, could feel her fighting to stay conscious. The journey that had taken him most of a day coming down would take twice that going up, especially with her injured and the storm worsening. He knew every deer trail and hidden path in these mountains, but in a blizzard, even familiar ground could turn treacherous. An hour out of town, Miriam went limp in his arms. He checked, still breathing, but her skin was cold, too cold. He urged the horse faster, knowing speed could mean death on these paths, but knowing too that stopping would surely kill her. The wind howled around them, driving snow into his face, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. He navigated by instinct and memory, trusting his horse's sure footing and his own knowledge of the mountain. Ice formed on his beard. His fingers went numb in his gloves, but he pressed on. At some point, he couldn't say when. Time lost meaning in the white wall of the storm. He realized he was talking to her. Nonsense. Mostly, just words to keep her anchored to consciousness. Stories about the mountains, about the proper way to set a trap, about anything except the blood soaking through her dress and his coat. "Stay with me," he found himself saying. "You survived those bastards. You can survive this. Your husband didn't die so you could give up in a snowstorm." She stirred slightly, murmured something he couldn't catch over the wind, but it was movement. It was life, and he held tighter to that than to her. The cabin materialized out of the storm like a ship from fog, dark logs barely visible until they were almost upon it. Elias had never been so glad to see the rough-hewn structure. He half fell from the saddle, pulled Miriam down after him. She was unconscious now, dead weight in his arms as he kicked open the door and carried her inside. The cabin was cold. He'd been gone too long for any warmth to linger, but it was shelter. He laid her on his narrow bed, then went back out into the storm to tend to his horse. The animal had earned its grain tonight, and possibly saved both their lives. When he returned, Miriam hadn't moved. In the lamplight, he could see how pale she'd become, how much blood soaked her dress. The wound in her side was bad, a knife wound, deep and ragged. He'd seen enough battlefield injuries to know it would kill her if not treated soon. He built up the fire until the cabin began to warm. Heated water, found what medical supplies he had. They weren't much. Some whiskey for cleaning wounds, bandages torn from an old shirt, a needle and thread meant for repairing clothes rather than flesh. But they would have to do. As he worked, cleaning and stitching the wound while she remained mercifully unconscious, he wondered what he'd gotten himself into. 3 years of solitude. 3 years of keeping the world at arm's length, undone by a woman's straight spine and defiant eyes. Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them in their mountain fortress. Whatever came next, whatever complications he'd invited into his life, would have to wait. For now, there was only the fire's warmth, the woman's labored breathing, and the strange feeling that fate, which had taken so much from him, might finally be offering something back. The fever came on the second night. Elias had been tending the fire when he heard her stirring. Soft moans breaking the cabin's silence. He found her tangled in the blankets, skin burning hot despite the sheen of sweat covering her face. Her eyes were open but unfocused, seeing things that weren't there. "Samuel?" she whispered, reaching toward empty air. "Samuel, the church, it's burning." He caught her hand, surprised by the strength of her grip. "He's not here," he said quietly. "You're safe." Her eyes found his face, confusion clouding their amber depths. "Who? I don't—" "Elias Gray. You're in my cabin. Remember?" Recognition flickered, followed by pain that had nothing to do with her physical wounds. "The church. They burned it. They burned him with it." Don't think about that now. You need to rest. But rest wouldn't come. The fever held her in its grip for 3 days. 3 nights of delirium and sweat and fighting to keep her alive. Elias found himself doing things he hadn't done for anyone in years, cooling her burning skin with snow-dampened cloths, spooning broth between her cracked lips, holding her still when the nightmares came. She talked in her fever, fragments of a life he hadn't asked to know, a childhood in Missouri, meeting Samuel at a church social, his earnest face and gentle hands, their wedding day, how he'd promised to love and protect her always. The slow realization that protection meant different things to different people, and that a pastor's wife in a mining town walked a narrow line between respectability and scandal. "They said I laughed too loud," she murmured one night, her fingers plucking restlessly at the blankets. "That I asked too many questions in Bible study. That a proper pastor's wife should be seen and not heard." Elias said nothing, just wrung out another cloth in the basin of cool water. He'd known plenty of women broken by the frontier's harsh expectations, ground down until nothing remained but bitter compliance. But even in her delirium, Miriam Hartley showed sparks of the fire that had gotten her husband killed. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. He dozed off in the chair beside the bed, jerking awake when he heard her voice, clear for the first time in days. "Water." He helped her sit up, held the cup to her lips. She drank slowly, eyes taking in the cabin's sparse interior, the rough-hewn walls, the few pieces of furniture he'd built himself, the rifles mounted above the fireplace. When she finished, she leaned back against the pillows, exhausted by even that small effort. "How long?" 4 days. Her hand went to her side, feeling the bandages beneath the clean shirt he'd put on her, one of his shirts, hanging loose on her smaller frame. A flush colored her pale cheeks as she realized the implications. Your dress was ruined," he said, turning away to tend the fire. "Blood doesn't wash out easy." Silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy. He could feel her watching him, weighing him with those amber eyes. Finally, she spoke. "Thank you for saving me, for this." She gestured to encompass the cabin. "The care, everything. Don't thank me yet. Storm's not letting up. We're stuck here for a while." "I'm intruding on your solitude." He shrugged, still not looking at her. "Solitude's overrated. Is that why you live up here alone? Because you believe that?" The question hung in the air like smoke. He could have ignored it, could have maintained the walls he'd built around himself. Instead, he found himself answering, "I live up here because down there, people know my name, and what comes with it. The Widowmaker." She said it quietly, without judgment. "I've heard the stories. Then you know why I keep to myself. I know stories, not truth." He turned then, studying her face. Most people, especially women, looked at him with fear once they knew who he was. But Miriam's expression held only curiosity and perhaps something else, understanding. "Truth's usually worse than the stories," he said. "Usually. Not always." He almost smiled at that. "You always this stubborn?" Samuel used to say God gave me a spine of iron and a tongue to match. Said it would get me in trouble someday. Her voice caught on her husband's name. He was right. Your husband sounds like he was a good man. He was too good for a place like Deadwood. He believed he could change things, make them better. He preached against Morrison's land grabs, the mysterious deaths of homesteaders who wouldn't sell, said God's justice would prevail. She closed her eyes. God's justice came too late. Elias moved to the stove, poured coffee from the pot that seemed to always be brewing. He offered her a cup, which she accepted with hands that shook only slightly. Morrison runs half the territory, he said. Your husband had to know the risk. He knew, but Samuel believed his collar would protect him, that even men like Morrison wouldn't dare harm a man of God. She sipped the coffee, made a face at its strength. I tried to warn him, but he had faith. Faith gets a lot of people killed out here. So does the lack of it. They fell into a routine over the following days. Strange and tentative, but functional. Elias would rise before dawn, Tend to the animals and check his trap lines. Miriam would be awake when he returned, having managed to drag herself from bed to attempt small tasks, mending his clothes with careful stitches, organizing his meager supplies, preparing simple meals. "You should be resting," he told her one morning, finding her at the table, struggling to peel potatoes with hands that still trembled. "I've rested enough. I won't be a burden. Didn't say you were." "You didn't have to." She resumed her work, jaw set with determination. "I may be a pastor's widow, Mr. Gray, but I wasn't raised helpless. I can earn my keep." He watched her for a moment, the stubborn set of her shoulders, the careful way she moved to avoid pulling her stitches. "All right, but you tear those stitches. You're the one sewing them back up." That earned him a small smile, the first he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, hinting at the woman she'd been before grief and pain marked her. But the peace couldn't last. The storm finally exhausted itself after a week, leaving behind a world transformed by white. Elias stood on the cabin's porch, studying the pristine landscape and the clear sky that promised bitter cold. "Will they come?" Miriam asked from the doorway, wrapped in a blanket against the chill. "Morrison's men, eventually. But not yet. They'll wait for the snow to settle, for the trails to be passable again. And then," he glanced at her, "then we deal with it." "You mean you deal with it? This isn't your fight. Made it mine when I pulled that trigger." She stepped onto the porch, moving carefully to stand beside him. "Why did you? You could have ridden on. Should have, from what I know of your reputation." He was quiet for a long moment, watching an eagle circle high above the peaks. Man spends enough years taking lives for money. He starts to wonder what it would feel like to save one for free. "Is that what I am? Redemption? You're a woman who needed help. Nothing more complicated than that." But it was complicated, and they both knew it. The cabin that had felt spacious to him alone now seemed to shrink with her presence. He found himself aware of her in ways he'd trained himself not to be aware of anyone. The sound of her breathing in the night, the way she hummed softly while working, the scent of her hair when she passed close by. She struggled with her own demons. He'd wake sometimes to find her standing at the window, staring out at the snow, tears tracking silently down her face. Other times, she'd freeze at some sound, a branch breaking, the wind shifting, her whole body tense with remembered fear. "They made me watch," she told him one night, the words spilling out like water through a broken dam. They sat before the fire, sharing a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving. "Made me watch while they beat him." Morrison himself came at the end, looked Samuel in the eye, and asked if he had any last words. Samuel forgave him, forgave them all. Morrison laughed, and she couldn't finish. Elias handed her the bottle, let her take a long pull that made her cough. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "I do, though. Someone should know. Someone should remember Samuel as more than the fool pastor who challenged the wrong man." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He wasn't a fool. He was the bravest man I knew, and I loved him for it, even when it scared me. Love makes fools of us all." She looked at him sharply. "Speaking from experience?" He took the bottle back, drank deep. "Once, long time ago." "What happened to her?" "She died." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "Caught in a crossfire during a range war. Wasn't even meant for her. Wrong place, wrong time." "Is that why you became the Widowmaker?" He smiled bitterly. "No. I became that because I was good with a gun and had nothing left to lose. The money was just an excuse to keep moving, keep killing, keep not thinking about her. But you stopped. You're here, not out there. Man can only carry so many ghosts before they get too heavy to move." She reached across the space between them, laid her hand over his. He stared at the contact, at her small fingers against his scarred knuckles. "I'm sorry," she said simply. He should have pulled away, should have stood up, walked outside, maintained the distance that kept him safe. Instead, he turned his hand palm up, let their fingers intertwine for just a moment before gently extracting himself. "It's late," he said, standing. "You should rest." She nodded. understanding the dismissal. But as she passed him on the way to the bed, she paused. "Elias? My ghosts are getting heavier too. It helps, not carrying them alone." After she'd settled for the night, he sat by the dying fire, thinking about ghosts and the dangerous comfort of shared pain. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, and he wondered which was more dangerous, the predators in the wild or the feeling stirring in his chest. The next morning brought new challenges. Miriam's wound, while healing, had left her weak. She tried to hide it, but he saw the way she gripped the table when she stood, the careful way she moved to avoid dizziness. "You need proper food," he announced after watching her pick at her breakfast. "I'm going hunting. In this snow, game's moving lower, looking for food. Best time to hunt." She frowned. "You're leaving me alone." "You'll be fine. Bar the door, keep the fire going, and don't answer if anyone comes calling." He checked his rifle, slipped extra ammunition into his pocket. "I'll be back before dark." "Elias." She stopped, shook her head. "Be careful." He almost said something then, almost acknowledged the concern in her voice and what it might mean. Instead, he nodded and stepped out into the crystal morning. The hunt gave him space to think, to breathe air not filled with her presence. He tracked a small herd of deer through the new snow, taking his time, letting the familiar rhythm of the hunt settle his thoughts. But even out here, she intruded. He found himself hurrying, worrying about leaving her alone too long. Imagining Morrison's men finding the cabin while he was gone, he took a young buck just after midday, dressed it quickly, and was heading back when he saw the tracks, horse tracks, fresh, cutting across his path toward the cabin. His blood went cold. He left the deer and ran, rifle ready, expecting the worst. But when he burst through the trees near the cabin, he found Miriam on the porch, holding his spare rifle with surprising steadiness, facing down a single rider. "I told you, she ain't here," the rider was saying. He was young, barely out of his teens, with the nervous energy of someone in over his head. "Boss just wants to know where she went is all." "And I told you," Miriam replied, her voice steady despite the rifle's weight. "I don't know any woman. Now get off this property before my husband gets back." The boy laughed nervously. "Lady, everyone knows Elias Gray ain't got no wife. He's a killer, not a family man." "People change," Elias said, stepping out of the trees. The boy's hand twitched toward his gun, then froze as he registered the rifle pointed at his chest. "The lady asked you to leave." "Mr. Gray, I didn't." "Morrison just wanted—" "I know what Morrison wants. Tell him he's looking in the wrong place. The woman's probably halfway to California by now." The boy nodded eagerly, too scared to question. "Yes, sir. I'll tell him. And boy, next person sets foot on my land uninvited won't get a warning. Clear. Clear as glass. Mr. Gray." The rider wheeled his horse and fled. Snow sprang from beneath its hooves. Elias watched until he disappeared into the trees, then turned to find Miriam sagging against the doorframe, the rifle dropping from nerveless fingers. He caught her before she fell, swept her up despite her weak protests. "Damn fool woman. You tore your stitches, didn't you?" "Maybe a little," she admitted, face pale but eyes defiant. "He was going to come inside. I couldn't let him find—" "Find what? Evidence you're here? Your bloody dress is ashes. Your horse is hidden with mine. He wouldn't have found anything." "He would have found me." The simple truth of it stopped his lecture. He carried her inside, set her gently on the bed. Sure enough, blood spotted the bandages at her side. "Going to have to redo these," he said. "I know." As he worked, cleaning and rebandaging the wound, she was quiet. Then, "Did you mean it? What you said about me being your wife?" His hand stilled for a moment. It was a story, easier for them to believe than the truth. The truth being that you're harboring the woman they're looking for out of, what, kindness. Truth being it's none of their damn business why you're here. She caught his hand as he finished tying off the bandage. "Elias, thank you For coming back when you did. You were handling it. I was terrified. Didn't show. Samuel always said I had a talent for seeming braver than I felt. Her smile was sad. Another thing that got him killed, probably, if I'd been a proper, meek pastor's wife. Then you'd be dead now too, Elias said bluntly. Man like Morrison doesn't leave witnesses, meek or otherwise. She absorbed that. Nodded slowly. You're right. Samuel's faith might have gotten him killed, but my stubbornness kept me alive. Nothing wrong with surviving. Is that what we're doing here? Just surviving? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to explore. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and reminding them both that winter was far from over. Whatever was growing between them in this small cabin, whatever complicated feelings were taking root, would have to wait. For now, survival was enough. But as Elias turned away to clean up the medical supplies, he couldn't help but notice how right she'd looked holding that rifle, defending what was his. Their charade of marriage had been a lie told in desperation, but for a moment, just a moment, it had felt like something else entirely. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow as Elias showed Miriam how to set a rabbit snare. Her hands, once soft from a life of tending house and hosting church socials, now moved with growing confidence as she twisted the wire into position. Tighter, he instructed, kneeling beside her in the snow. Rabbit hits this loose, he'll slip right through. She adjusted the wire, her brow furrowed in concentration. 2 weeks had passed since the rider's visit, and her wound had healed enough for her to venture outside. The color had returned to her cheeks, and with it, a restlessness that drove her to learn everything he could teach. Like this. Better. He reached around her to demonstrate the final adjustment, suddenly aware of how close they were. The scent of her, soap and snow, and something uniquely her filled his senses. He pulled back, standing abruptly. Set 3 more along this trail. Rabbits are creatures of habit. She looked up at him, something unreadable in her amber eyes. Aren't we all? They worked in companionable silence, moving through the forest as the sun climbed higher. He taught her to read tracks in the snow, the delicate prints of deer, the larger pads of wolves, the distinctive pattern of snowshoe hares. She absorbed it all with the same intensity she'd once brought to Bible study, asking questions that showed she understood not just the how, but the why. You're a quick study, he admitted as they paused to rest on a fallen log. I had to be. She brushed snow from her borrowed trousers, his clothes, taken in with the neat stitches to fit her smaller frame. Samuel was a city man when we married, when the church sent us west. I learned fast that knowing how to pour tea properly wouldn't keep us alive. Most women would have insisted on going back east. I'm not most women. No, he agreed quietly. You're not. The weight of the admission hung between them. She turned to face him fully, and he saw the moment she decided to be brave. Elias, what are we doing? Teaching you to trap rabbits. That's not what I meant. He stood, brushing snow from his clothes. We should check the other trap line. Stop. She caught his sleeve. Please, just talk to me. Nothing to talk about. Isn't there? She rose to face him, chin tilted up to meet his eyes. You saved my life. You've sheltered me, taught me, protected me. But you can barely look at me sometimes. And when you do, she trailed off, color rising in her cheeks. When I do, what? When you do, I feel like you're seeing someone else, someone you lost. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He'd been so careful, so controlled, but she'd seen through him anyway. Her name was Catherine, he said finally. And yes, sometimes when the light hits just right, or you laugh a certain way. He shook his head. It's not fair to you. What's not fair is shutting me out because of ghosts. She stepped closer. I'm not her. Elias, I'm not asking you to forget her, but I'm here, and I'm alive, and I... Don't... The word came out harsher than intended. You're grieving. You're vulnerable. You don't know what you're saying. Fire flashed in her eyes. Don't you dare. Don't you dare tell me what I know or feel. I buried my husband. I watched him die for his principles. I grieved him every day of this last month. But that doesn't mean I'm dead too. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Her voice cracked. Help me understand why you hold yourself so apart. Why you saved my life and then act like it was a mistake. Why you look at me like you. She broke off, frustrated. And before he could stop her, she'd closed the distance between them. Her kiss was unpracticed but fierce. All the emotions they'd been dancing around poured into the contact. For a moment, he froze. Then his control shattered. He pulled her against him, deepening the kiss with a hunger that surprised them both. She made a soft sound, her hands fisting in his coat, and he was lost. The forest, the snow, the weight of their separate griefs, all of it fell away, leaving only this moment, this connection he'd denied himself for so long. Reality crashed back when she winced, her hand going to her still tender side. He released her immediately, stepping back, breathing hard. "I'm sorry," she said, though her eyes suggested she was anything but. "No, I am." He ran a hand through his hair. We can't." "Why not?" The simple question undid him. Why not? Indeed. Because he was a killer? Because she was a widow barely a month in mourning? Because he'd sworn never to care for anyone again? All true, all excuses. "Because I'll get you killed," he said finally. "Everyone they all end up dead. Catherine, my brother, partners I rode with. I'm poison. Miriam." "You're a man," she countered. "A man who's seen too much death. Yes, done things you regret, certainly. But poison?" She shook her head. "Poison doesn't save strangers, doesn't teach them to survive, doesn't look at them the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. You don't know what I've done." "Then tell me." They made their way back to the cabin in silence. But it was a different silence than before, charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. Once inside, Miriam busied herself with building up the fire while Elias paced, wrestling with memories he'd buried deep. Finally, he spoke. "First man I killed was 17 years old, same as me. Range war in Texas. Everyone picking sides. He drew on me in a saloon, and I was faster." He stared into the flames. I can still see his face when he realized he was dying. Surprised. Like he'd never considered it could happen to him. Miriam said nothing, just waited. "After that, it got easier. Too easy. I had a gift. They said, fast hands, cold nerves. Men started hiring me to solve their problems. Legitimate at first, protecting cattle drives, standing guard for banks. But then," he paused, the words sticking in his throat. "Then a rancher named Watson offered me $500 to kill his neighbor. Land dispute. The neighbor had a family, kids. I said yes. Did you do it?" "No. Went to warn him instead. Watson sent other men. They killed the whole family, burned the house, made it look like Indians did it." His laugh was bitter. "That's when I learned that saying no wasn't enough. Should have killed Watson instead. Might have saved those kids. You can't carry the weight of what others did." "Can I? I spent 10 years after that taking any job that paid, told myself I was choosing my targets carefully, only killing those who deserved it. But who was I to judge? Who made me God?" She moved to stand before him. "What changed? Why did you stop?" "Catherine," the name still hurt to say. "Met her in a town called Sawyer's Creek. She was a school teacher, proper Eastern education. Had no business being interested in a gun hand like me, but she was." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Said she saw something in me worth saving. Convinced me to try. We were going to leave together. Head to Oregon, start fresh. What happened? Range war broke out. I tried to stay neutral, but my reputation preceded me. Both sides wanted me to pick a side. When I refused, they decided to force my hand." His hands clenched. "Caught her in the crossfire outside the school. She died in my arms. Never even got to tell her." Miriam took his hands in hers, uncurling the fists. "Tell her what?" "That I loved her, that she'd already saved me, just by believing I was worth it." They stood like that for a long moment, her hands holding his, offering comfort he didn't deserve but couldn't refuse. Finally, she spoke. She was right. You know, you are worth saving. Miriam? No, listen. You think you're poison? You're the antidote. You saved me not because someone paid you, but because it was right. You've cared for me, taught me, protected me, and asked nothing in return. The man you were might have been a killer. The man you are. She reached up to touch his face. The man you are is good. He caught her hand, held it against his cheek. You don't know that. I do. Her thumb traced the line of a scar near his jaw. I've lived with a good man. I know what one looks like. The comparison to her late husband should have been a bucket of cold water, should have reminded them both of the impossibility of their situation. Instead, it felt like permission. This time when they came together, it was slower, more deliberate. He cradled her face in his hands, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the flutter of her pulse at her throat. She pressed closer, careful of her healing wound but unwilling to maintain any distance. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, he rested his forehead against hers. This is complicated, he murmured. Everything worth having is... That night, they sat closer by the fire than usual. Not touching, that line hadn't been crossed yet, but aware of each other in a way that made the cabin feel smaller, warmer. Miriam was mending one of his shirts, her needle moving in steady rhythm, while he cleaned his weapons. Tell me about Samuel, he said suddenly. She looked up, surprised. Why? Because he was important to you. Because I want to understand. She set down her sewing, gaze distant. He was gentle. That's what I remember most. Gentle in a world that rewards hardness. He truly believed that kindness could change hearts, that love could conquer hate. She smiled sadly. I loved him for that idealism, even when it frustrated me. You wanted him to fight back. Sometimes, yes, when Morrison's men would disrupt services, when they'd threaten congregation members who spoke out, I wanted him to be angry, to meet force with force. She shook her head. But that wasn't Samuel. He'd turn the other cheek and pray for their souls. Noble. Foolish. Maybe both. She picked up the sewing again. He knew I struggled with it. My faith was never as strong as his. I believed in God, but I also believed in justice here on earth. We argued about it sometimes. And now? Now, she made a few more stitches. Now I think maybe God puts different people on earth for different purposes. Samuel's purpose was to show that goodness could exist even in dark places. Maybe yours is to protect that goodness when kindness isn't enough. That's a generous interpretation of my life. Or an honest one. She looked at him directly. You say you're poison, but I've watched you these weeks. The way you care for your horse, the patience you show teaching me, the way you've never once taken advantage despite... She gestured between them. Despite this, whatever you were, whoever you were, the man I see now is someone trying to be better. That's all any of us can do. He set aside the rifle he'd been cleaning, disturbed by how much her words meant to him. And if Morrison's men come, if I have to kill again to protect you, then you'll do what's necessary, and I won't think less of you for it. Her voice hardened. They murdered my husband. They burned God's house. They forfeit any claim to mercy. The steel in her voice surprised him. That doesn't sound like turn the other cheek. I told you, my faith was never as pure as Samuel's. She tied off her thread, bit it clean. Perhaps that's why I'm still alive. Later, as the fire died to embers and she prepared for bed, he found himself watching her, the way she moved around the cabin with growing familiarity, the way she'd claimed small spaces as her own, her sewing basket by the chair, her brush on the shelf, the spare boots by the door. She was weaving herself into his life thread by thread, and he wasn't sure he had the strength to stop it anymore. Elias? She paused at the edge of the bed, his bed, which he'd given up for her while he slept on a pallet by the fire. Yeah? What happened today? I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm not asking for promises or declarations. She took a breath. I just wanted to feel alive again, to remember that I'm more than grief and fear. You gave me that. He stood, crossed to her, took her hands. You are so much more than that. Your strength and fire and grace under pressure. He stopped, overwhelmed by the truth of it. You're the first good thing to walk into my life in 3 years. She squeezed his hands. Then maybe we can be good for each other. Maybe that's enough. As she settled into bed and he returned to his pallet, Elias thought about good things and second chances. Outside, snow began to fall again, sealing them into their small world. But for the first time since Catherine died, the isolation didn't feel like hiding. It felt like possibility. He lay awake long into the night, listening to Miriam's breathing even out into sleep, and wondered if a man who'd lived by the gun so long could learn to live by something else. Something like hope. Something like her. The wind howled around the cabin, but inside was warmth and quiet companionship. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Morrison's inevitable search, decisions about the future, the complicated navigation of two damaged hearts trying to heal. But tonight, there was peace. And for now, that was enough. The tension that had been building between them for weeks finally reached its breaking point on a night when the moon hung full over the snow-covered peaks. Miriam had been quieter than usual during dinner, pushing food around her plate, lost in thoughts she wouldn't share. "What's troubling you?" Elias finally asked, setting down his coffee cup. She looked up, amber eyes bright with unshed tears. "Today would have been our anniversary, Samuel's and mine, 5 years." The admission hung heavy in the air. Elias felt the familiar urge to retreat, to give her space to grieve, but something in her expression stopped him. "Tell me about it," he said instead. "Your wedding day." A sad smile touched her lips. "It rained, poured. Actually, Samuel said it was good luck. That rain meant prosperity. I was just worried about my dress." She laughed softly. "Such a silly thing to worry about. But I'd sewn it myself, spent months on the embroidery. I wanted everything to be perfect." "Was it?" "No. The church leaked. Half the guests couldn't make it through the muddy roads, and the cake fell when Mrs. Morrison, Ben's mother, ironically dropped it." She shook her head. "But Samuel just laughed, said God was reminding us that perfection wasn't the point. Love was. Sounds like something a preacher would say. He meant it, though, every word." She stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the moonlit snow. "I feel like I'm betraying him, being here, feeling." "Feeling what?" She turned to face him, and the raw emotion in her eyes took his breath away. "You know what? Don't make me say it." He rose, crossed to her in 3 strides. "Miriam?" "I tried to stop it," she continued, words tumbling out now. "Told myself it was gratitude or loneliness or some mad reaction to nearly dying. But it's not, is it? This thing between us." "No," he admitted quietly. "It's not. Samuel's barely cold in his grave, and I'm—" She pressed her hands to her face. "What kind of woman does that make me?" "A living one." He gently pulled her hands down, held them in his. "You think Samuel would want you to die with him, to spend your life in mourning?" "I don't know what he'd want. I'll never know, because they killed him." The tears came then, hot and angry. "They killed him, and I couldn't stop them. And now I'm here with you, and I want things I shouldn't want, feel things I shouldn't feel." He pulled her against him, let her sob into his chest. His own throat felt tight as he held her, one hand stroking her hair. "It's not wrong to want to live. Miriam, it's not wrong to want to feel something besides pain." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, tears still streaming. "Then why does it hurt so much?" "Because you're human, because you loved him, because healing isn't pretty or easy or clean." He cupped her face, thumbs brushing away tears. "But that doesn't mean you shouldn't heal." She stretched up on her toes and kissed him, salty with tears and desperate with need. This time, he didn't pull away. Couldn't. The dam had broken, and everything they'd been holding back came flooding through. Later, they lay entwined before the fire, skin still cooling, hearts still racing. Miriam traced the scars on his chest. Knife wounds, bullet wounds, a lifetime of violence written on his body. So many, she murmured. Everyone earned. Do they hurt? Not anymore. He caught her hand, pressed it flat over his heart. Other things hurt worse. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't regret this. You might, come morning. No. She propped herself up on an elbow, hair falling like a curtain around them. Whatever happens tomorrow, or next week, or next month, I won't regret tonight. I needed to remember I was more than a widow, more than a victim. You gave me that. You gave me something too, he admitted. Reminded me I was more than a killer. They came together again, slower this time, savoring what they'd denied themselves for so long. Outside, snow began to fall, but inside their small world, there was only warmth and connection and the sweet ache of two broken hearts learning to beat again. The peace shattered 3 nights later. Elias woke to the sound of horses, multiple horses, moving fast through the forest. He was on his feet in an instant, reaching for his guns. Elias? Miriam sat up, instantly alert. These weeks had taught her to sleep light. Get dressed, quick! He was already pulling on his clothes, checking his weapons. Take the rifle, go to the root cellar. How many? 4, maybe 5. He buckled on his gun belt. Too many for coincidence. She was already moving, pulling on clothes with efficient movements. I'm not hiding while you... Yes, you are. He caught her shoulders. These aren't drunk cowboys. They're here for blood. Then we face them together. Miriam. The first shot shattered the window, showering them with glass. Elias threw himself over her, rolling them both behind the heavy table as more shots followed. Morrison's dogs, a voice called from outside. We know the woman's in there. Gray, send her out, and we'll make your death quick. Elias met Miriam's eyes. She shook her head fiercely. Don't even think about it, she hissed. He couldn't help but smile grimly. Wasn't planning to? He raised his voice. Anyone sets foot on my property goes home in a box. That's the only deal on the table. Have it your way. Widowmaker, boys, burn them out. The smell of smoke reached them moments later. They'd set fire to the woodpile against the back wall. Elias cursed under his breath. The roof, Miriam said. It's too wet to catch easy, but the walls... I know. He was already calculating. 5 men, positions unknown, fire spreading, limited ammunition, bad odds all around. Still want to face this together? She grabbed the rifle, checked the load with movements he'd taught her. Till the end. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. He risked a look through the shattered window, ducked back as shots rang out. 2 by the tree line, 1 behind the water trough. Can't spot the others. What's the plan? You're asking me? I usually just shoot my way out. Despite everything, she laughed. Then let's shoot our way out. The next minutes were chaos. Smoke filled the cabin as the fire spread. Elias picked off 1 man who got careless. Miriam winged another who tried to rush the door, but they were being pushed back, the smoke making it hard to see, harder to breathe. We can't stay here. Miriam gasped between shots. Elias knew she was right. In minutes, they'd have to choose between burning and making a run for it. Either way, Morrison's men would be waiting. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. More horses. Coming fast. Company, he muttered. Morrison's reinforcements. Maybe, maybe not. He made a decision. We go out the front, hard and fast. You break left, I'll go right. Make for the trees. Elias, no arguments. He pulled her close, kissed her hard. Whatever happens, keep running. Promise me. I promised nothing. He should have known better. They burst through the door together, guns blazing. Elias dropped 1 man immediately. saw another fall to Miriam's shot, but there were more. Too many. And the new riders burst into the clearing, and suddenly, Morrison's men were caught between two forces. Elias recognized the lead rider, Tom Brennan, a former partner from his gunslinging days. "Thought you might need help," Brennan called, dropping from his saddle to take cover. "Heard Morrison was hunting. Figured he might find you." The tide turned quickly. Morrison's remaining men, caught off guard and outgunned, tried to flee. 2 made it to their horses. 1 didn't. As the smoke cleared and the immediate danger passed, Elias found Miriam leaning against a tree, rifle still in her hands, a graze on her arm bleeding through her shirt. "You're hit. It's nothing." But she let him examine the wound, winced as he tied a bandage around it. "Your friend?" Elias glanced at Brennan, who was directing his men to fight the fire before it spread to the forest. "Former partner, good man, for a killer." "Takes one to know one?" "Something like that." Brennan approached, hat in hand. He was older than Elias, weathered by years of hard living, but his eyes were kind as they took in Miriam. "Ma'am, Tom Brennan. Sorry about your cabin." "Elias." Elias surveyed the damage. The back wall was destroyed. The roof partially collapsed. "It served its purpose. Morrison won't stop," Brennan said. "Not now. He's put too much into this to back down." "I know. There's another way." Brennan glanced between them. "You could come with us. We're heading to California. Got a job lined up. Good money. Enough to start over. I'm done with that life, Tom." "Are you?" Brennan looked pointedly at the bodies cooling in the snow. "Seems like that life ain't done with you." Miriam stepped forward. "There's another way. We go back to Deadwood, face Morrison legally. There must be some law left, some justice." "Justice?" Brennan laughed, but not unkindly. "Ma'am, no offense, but men like Morrison don't face justice. They buy it, or kill it, or both." "Then what do you suggest?" she snapped. "Run forever, hide, let him win." "I suggest," Elias said quietly, "we end this, once and for all." Both Brennan and Miriam turned to him. He stood looking at his ruined cabin, at the life he'd built in isolation, now literally in ashes. "Morrison wants the woman who can testify about her husband's murder," he continued. "He gets word she's willing to meet, discuss terms. He'll come himself. Man like that. He'll want to handle it personal." "Elias, no." Miriam grabbed his arm. "You're talking about using me as bait. I'm talking about finishing what they started." He met her eyes. "You said you wanted justice for Samuel. This is how we get it." "It's suicide," Brennan observed. "Morrison will bring an army. Not if he thinks he's already won. Not if he believes she's broken, ready to disappear for the right price." Elias smiled coldly. "Greed makes men stupid. Morrison's greedier than most." They argued for another hour as Brennan's men salvaged what they could from the cabin. In the end, it was Miriam who ended the debate. "I'll do it," she announced. "But on my terms." "And Elias?" She fixed him with a stare that brooked no argument. "We do this together, or not at all." He wanted to protest, to insist she stay safe while he handled Morrison. But looking at her, blood on her shirt, steel in her spine, determination burning in her eyes, he knew she'd earned the right to face her husband's killer. Together, he agreed. Brennan shook his head. "You're both crazy, but if you're set on this course," he smiled, "count me and the boys in. Been a while since we did something for reasons other than money." As they made plans, Elias caught Miriam's hand, pulled her aside. "You don't have to do this. There are other ways." "No," she interrupted. "There aren't. Not for me. I need to look Morrison in the eye. I need him to know that killing Samuel didn't break me, that he failed. And after, if we survive," she touched his face, traced the line of his jaw, "then we live, really live. Not just survive, not just hide. We build something new from the ashes." She gestured at the ruined cabin. "Literally, if necessary." "Together, if you'll have me." A widow with a talent for trouble and too many opinions. If you'll have me, a killer trying to find redemption. She kissed him, soft and sure. We make quite a pair. That we do. As dawn broke over the mountains, they prepared to leave. The cabin still smoldered, but Elias found he didn't mourn it. It had been a hiding place, not a home. Home, he was beginning to understand, wasn't a place at all. He watched Miriam checking her rifle, preparing for the fight ahead, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just desire or protectiveness, but partnership. They'd face Morrison together. And whatever came after, the ghosts of their pasts, Samuel and Catherine and all the others, would always be with them. But maybe that was fitting. Maybe the dead could rest easier knowing the living had found each other, had found a reason to keep fighting. "Ready?" Brennan called. Elias looked at Miriam. She nodded. Warrior and woman in equal measure. "Ready," they said together. As they rode out, leaving the ruined cabin behind, snow began to fall again. But this time, it felt less like a burial shroud and more like a clean slate. Whatever happened in Deadwood, whatever justice they found or made, they'd face it as they'd learned to face everything else, together. The journey back to Deadwood tested them in ways the comfortable isolation of the cabin never had. A late spring blizzard caught them in the open, forcing them to seek shelter in a shallow cave barely large enough for their group. As the wind howled outside and snow piled up at the entrance, they huddled together for warmth, sharing what little food they had. "Should have stayed in California," one of Brennan's men muttered, his teeth chattering. "Jake's got a point," another added. "This ain't our fight, Tom." Brennan silenced them with a look. "Made it our fight when we chose it. Anyone wants out. They can leave come morning." None did, though Elias caught the worried glances they threw toward the cave mouth where snow continued to fall. He understood their fear. These were hired guns, not crusaders. They followed Brennan out of loyalty, not conviction. Miriam sat pressed against his side, conserving warmth. She hadn't complained once during the brutal journey, though he'd seen her wince when the cold made her barely healed wound ache. "Tell me about Oregon," she said quietly, her breath misting in the frigid air. "What?" "You mentioned once that you'd planned to go to Oregon. Tell me about it." He was silent for a moment, remembering. Green valleys that go on forever, rivers full of salmon, forests so thick you could get lost 10 feet from your cabin. Catherine had a picture book, used to show me drawings of the Willamette Valley. Said we'd have a little farm, maybe run some sheep. Sounds peaceful. That was the idea. Somewhere nobody knew my name or cared about my reputation. Somewhere we could just be. She took his hand under the blanket they shared. "We could still go, after this is done. We, unless you've got other plans." "Miriam," he struggled for words. "You barely know me. Few weeks in a cabin doesn't make a future." "No," she agreed. "But it's a start, and I know enough. I know you're a good man trying to atone for past sins. I know you treat me as an equal, not a possession or a burden. I know when I wake from nightmares. You're there." She squeezed his hand. "That's more than many women get in a lifetime." From across the cave, Brennan watched them with knowing eyes. "She's got sand. Elias, don't be a fool." "Nobody asked you, Tom." "No, but I'll say my piece anyway. Known you 8 years. Never seen you look at anyone the way you look at her." "Not even—" He trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. "It's complicated," Elias said. "Best things usually are." Miriam murmured, and that ended the discussion. The storm broke near dawn, leaving behind a world transformed by white. They dug themselves out and continued on, making slower progress through the deep drifts. It was on the 3rd day, as they descended into a valley that would lead them to the main trail, that they found the tracks. "Riders," Jake said, studying the churned snow. "Maybe a dozen, heading toward Deadwood." "Morrison's men?" Miriam asked. Elias dismounted, examined the tracks more closely. No, these horses are shod different. Military, maybe, or... He stood, frowning. Tom, remember those Pinkerton boys we tangled with in Cheyenne? Brennan cursed colorfully. You think Morrison hired detectives? Makes sense. He can't send his regular thugs after us anymore. We've killed too many. But Pinkertons, they've got legal authority, backing from the railroad companies. What does that mean for us? Miriam demanded. Means we're not just fighting Morrison anymore, Elias said grimly. We're fighting the law he's bought. They camped early that night in a defensible position overlooking the trail. As they sat around the small fire, plans were adjusted, refined. The complexity of their situation was becoming clearer. We need proof, Miriam said suddenly. Not just my word against Morrison's. Real evidence. What kind of proof? Jake asked. Samuel kept journals, detailed records of everything he witnessed, every threat, every suspicious death. He hid them in the church, in a compartment beneath the altar. If they survived the fire. That's a big if, Brennan pointed out. But worth checking. Elias decided. We split up tomorrow. Tom, you and the boys scout the town. See what Morrison's up to. Miriam and I will check the church ruins. Splitting up's dangerous, Tom warned. Everything we're doing is dangerous. That night, as the others slept, Miriam found Elias on watch, staring out at the star-filled sky. Can't sleep? She asked, settling beside him. Thinking. About what comes after. If we get Morrison, if we survive, if we make it to Oregon, what then? Then we live, she said simply. We build that farm you talked about, raise sheep, maybe children, if... She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. He turned to her. Children? I'm not getting younger. Elias, and after what happened, the doctor in Deadwood said there might be damage, that I might not... She took a breath. Would that matter? To you? He pulled her close. No, nothing about you could matter except that you're here. I might be broken. You're not broken. You're the strongest person I know. He tilted her chin up. And if we have children, we'll love them. If we don't, we'll love each other. Either way, we'll have a life worth living. She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and hope and growing love into the contact. When they parted, she was crying. What is it? Samuel and I tried for years. It was a source of disappointment. People whispered, said God was punishing us. Some even suggested Samuel should put me aside, take a younger wife. She wiped her eyes angrily. He never would, of course, said I was enough, just as I was. He was right. I'm scared. Elias, not of Morrison or his men. I'm scared of hoping again, of wanting things and watching them burn. Then we'll be scared together, he said. And we'll hope together. And if it burns, we'll build again. That's what people do. They returned to the others before dawn, found them already breaking camp. The final approach to Deadwood would be the most dangerous, the most likely place for ambush. Remember, Brennan said as they mounted up. We're travelers looking for supplies, nothing more. Elias, you and the lady keep those faces covered. You're too recognizable. They rode in loose formation, alert for trouble. The forest gave way to open ground, the trail widening as it approached the town. Smoke rose from chimneys in the distance, the normal life of Deadwood continuing despite the violence that had birthed their journey. It was Jake who spotted the ambush first. Riders coming up behind us. Fast! Elias turned in his saddle, counted 6 men closing the distance. Not trying to hide. They want us to know they're coming. The Pinkertons? Miriam asked. Most like. What do we do? We don't run. Elias decided. Running makes us look guilty. Tom, you and the boys keep riding. Miriam and I will talk to them. Like hell, Brennan started. That's an order. Elias's voice carried the authority of his gunfighting days. We'll catch up. Reluctantly, Brennan led his men on, while Elias and Miriam reined in their horses to wait. The riders approached in a disciplined line, and Elias recognized the type professional manhunters, far more dangerous than Morrison's usual thugs. The lead rider, a thin man with spectacles and the bearing of an accountant, held up a hand as they drew close. "Mr. Gray, Mrs. Hartley, I'm Agent Carlyle with the Pinkerton Detective Agency. We'd like a word." "So talk," Elias said. "You're wanted for questioning in the deaths of 5 men near your cabin. There are also questions about the church fire and Pastor Hartley's death." "Questions from who?" Miriam demanded. "Ben Morrison?" Carlyle's expression didn't change. "From concerned citizens who want justice done. Will you come peacefully?" "Are we under arrest?" Elias asked. "Not yet, but refusal to cooperate would be unfortunate." Elias felt Miriam tense beside him. 6 armed Pinkertons. Open ground. Nowhere to run. But something felt off. Carlyle seemed nervous. His men, too, spread out for proper coverage. "Tell Morrison we'll discuss terms," Elias said finally. "But on neutral ground. The old mission. Tomorrow noon. He comes with no more than 3 men. We do the same." Carlyle frowned. "I don't speak for Mr. Morrison." "Sure you do." Elias smiled coldly. "Man doesn't hire Pinkertons without keeping them on a short leash. Deliver the message. We'll be waiting. And if you're not, then Morrison can keep looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life, however long that is." They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Carlyle nodded. "I'll convey your message. But Mr. Gray, the agency has a long memory. Whatever happens tomorrow, we'll be watching. Get in line," Elias muttered as the Pinkertons wheeled their horses and rode back toward town. "You think Morrison will agree?" Miriam asked as they spurred their horses to catch up with the others. "He'll agree. His pride won't let him refuse." Elias glanced at her. "You ready for this?" "I've been ready since they killed Samuel." Her voice was steady, resolved. "Tomorrow, one way or another, it ends." They found Brennan and his men waiting at a creek crossing, weapons drawn until they recognized their approach. "Pinkertons?" Tom asked, bearing Morrison's offer. Elias confirmed. "Or rather, our terms that they'll pretend were his idea." "The old mission's defensible," Jake observed. "Good sight lines, multiple exits. Also holy ground." Miriam added quietly, "Samuel preached there sometimes, to the miners who couldn't make it to town. It seems fitting." That night they camped in the ruins of an old trading post, taking turns on watch. Elias found himself unable to sleep, too aware of what the next day might bring. He'd faced death countless times, but always for money or survival. This felt different. This felt like destiny. "Can't sleep either." Miriam appeared beside him, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. "Thinking about tomorrow, and wondering if I'm leading you to your death." She settled against him, fitting perfectly into his side. "You're not leading me anywhere. I'm choosing this. Same as you. I could still call it off. Take you to Oregon tonight. Leave Morrison to rot in his own corruption. Could you? Could you live with letting him win?" He was quiet for a long moment. "No, but I could live with it better than I could live with losing you. You won't lose me." She sounded so certain, so sure. "We've come too far, survived too much. God wouldn't be so cruel as to bring us together only to tear us apart." "You sure about that? Your God hasn't shown much mercy lately." "My God gave me you," she said simply. "That's mercy enough." They stayed like that until dawn, watching the stars fade and the sky lighten with the promise of a new day. Their last day, perhaps, but Elias found he wasn't afraid. Whatever came, they'd face it together. The man he'd been, the widow-maker, the hired gun, the killer, would have faced this alone. But that man had died somewhere in a snowbound cabin, replaced by someone who understood that some battles couldn't be won alone. "It's time," Brennan said, as the sun crested the mountains. They broke camp efficiently, checked weapons, prepared for what might be their final ride. As they mounted up, Miriam caught Elias's arm. "Whatever happens today, I want you to know something. Miriam, no, let me say it. I love you, Elias Gray, not in spite of what you were, but because of who you are. You gave me strength when I had none, hope when mine was ashes. You brought me back to life." She smiled through tears. "So thank you for all of it." He kissed her, not caring who saw, pouring everything he couldn't say into the contact. When they parted, he managed, "I love you too. Have since you stood up to those men with nothing but courage and conviction. You saved me right back, Miriam Hartley." "Then let's go finish saving each other," she said. They rode toward Deadwood as the morning sun painted the mountains gold. Toward justice or death or both, but no longer alone. Whatever waited at the old mission, they'd meet it as they'd learned to meet everything. Together, unflinching, unafraid. The old mission stood on a hill overlooking Deadwood, its adobe walls crumbling but still proud against the morning sky. As their group approached, Elias counted the horses already tied outside. 4, not the agreed-upon 3. Morrison was already breaking the terms. "Trap?" Brennan murmured. "Probably, but we knew it would be." Elias dismounted, helped Miriam down. "Tom, you and Jake take the high ground. Watch for more riders. If this goes bad, we'll handle it," Tom assured him. Miriam checked the derringer hidden in her sleeve, the one Elias had given her that morning. Her face was pale, but determined as they walked toward the mission entrance. Inside, sunlight streamed through holes in the roof, illuminating dust motes and the figures waiting for them. Ben Morrison stood near what had been the altar, a big man gone to fat, but still dangerous. Beside him stood Agent Carlyle and 2 other men hired guns by their look. "Mrs. Hartley," Morrison said, his voice oily with false sympathy. "Such a tragedy about your husband. He was a good man, if misguided." "He was murdered," Miriam said flatly. "By your order." Morrison spread his hands. "Harsh words. I came here hoping we could reach an understanding. After all, accusations without proof are just gossip." "Then let me be clear." Miriam stepped forward, and Elias moved with her, hand near his gun. "I saw you give the order. I heard you laugh as they beat him. I watched you set the church ablaze with his body inside. Your word against mine." "And who are you? A woman of questionable reputation, running off with a known killer mere weeks after your husband's death?" Morrison smiled. "No court would believe you." "What about a court of public opinion?" Miriam reached into her coat, and every gun in the room shifted toward her. But she pulled out only papers, singed but readable. Samuel's journals, retrieved from the church ruins. Every threat documented, every suspicious death recorded. Names, dates, amounts paid. Morrison's smile faltered. "Forgeries. In Samuel's hand, the whole town knows his writing. He wrote letters for those who couldn't, kept records for the miners." She held up the papers. "This is evidence. Mr. Morrison, real evidence." "Give them to me." Morrison's voice had gone hard. "Name your price." "Justice for my husband." "I said name your price. Money? Safe passage? I can be generous to those who see reason." Elias spoke for the first time. She already named it. Morrison looked at him with contempt. "The famous widowmaker. Tell me, Gray, how much would it take for you to put a bullet in her head right now?" 1,000, 5. The silence that followed was deafening. Elias smiled, cold as winter wind. "There isn't enough money in the world. Pity. Then I suppose we do this the hard way." Morrison nodded to his men. What happened next would be debated in Deadwood saloons for years. Some said Elias drew first, others that Morrison's men initiated the violence. But Miriam knew the truth. They moved together, she and Elias, as if choreographed by fate itself. Elias's Colt cleared leather faster than thought, dropping Morrison's nearest gunman before the man's weapon was half drawn. Miriam dove behind an overturned pew, the derringer in her hand barking once, catching the second gunman in the shoulder. Morrison scrambled for cover as Carlyle shouted, "No, this wasn't the plan." "Plans change," Morrison snarled, drawing his own weapon. The mission erupted in gunfire. Plaster dust filled the air as bullets chewed into ancient walls. From outside came the crack of rifles. Tom and Jake. Picking off reinforcements Morrison had hidden nearby. Elias moved like a force of nature. Every shot deliberate, every movement calculated. But there were too many, and Morrison had chosen his ground well. "The journals!" Morrison roared. "Get those journals!" Two men rushed Miriam's position. She fired the Derringer's second shot, missing, then grabbed a fallen pistol. The weapon was heavier than she expected, but Elias's training held. "Squeeze! Don't jerk! Aim for center mass!" The first attacker spun and fell. The second man was on her before she could fire again, his hands reaching for the papers. They struggled, rolling across the dusty floor. His weight was crushing, his hands finding her throat. The pressure vanished suddenly. She gasped for air, saw Elias standing over the man's body, blood on his knife. "You all right?" She nodded, unable to speak. He hauled her to her feet as more gunfire erupted outside. Through a window, she could see riders approaching, but whose? "Gray!" Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Let's end this like men, you and me." Elias looked at Miriam. She still clutched the journals, her hair wild, a bruise already forming on her throat. But her eyes were clear, determined. "Do it," she whispered. He stepped into the open. Morrison emerged from behind the altar, gun in hand. For a moment, they faced each other. The corrupt businessman who ruled through fear, and the gunfighter who'd found something worth protecting. "You ruined everything," Morrison said. "You and that meddling preacher. I offered him a fortune to look the other way." "Some men can't be bought," Elias replied. "Every man has a price." "You're right. Mine was her life. You threatened that." They drew simultaneously. 2 shots, so close they sounded as one. Morrison staggered, looking down at the spreading red stain on his chest with surprise. His gun fell from nerveless fingers. "Impossible," he gasped. "I paid for the best." "You paid for killers," Elias said, his own weapon steady despite the blood seeping through his shirt where Morrison's bullet had found its mark. "You should have paid for men with something to fight for." Morrison fell to his knees, then forward. He was dead before he hit the ground. "Elias!" Miriam rushed to him as he swayed. "You're hit." Had worse, but he let her support him, her strength keeping him upright. Carlyle emerged from cover, hands raised. "I had no part in the killings. I was hired to find you, nothing more." "Then do your job," Miriam said fiercely. "Find the truth. Report it. Let everyone know what Morrison did." The Pinkerton looked at Morrison's body, at the journals in Miriam's hand, and nodded slowly. The agency's contract died with him. The truth, that's free. The riders who'd approached turned out to be townspeople, drawn by the gunfire. Among them was a face Miriam recognized. John Whitman, the town's newspaper editor. "Mrs. Hartley? What happened here?" She straightened, still supporting Elias. "Justice happened. Long overdue justice." She held out the journals. "Everything's in here. Samuel documented it all. Will you print it?" Whitman took the journals with reverent hands. "Every word. Ma'am, the whole territory will know the truth." "Good." She turned to Elias, fear replacing determination as she saw how pale he'd become. "We need a doctor." "No doctor," he managed. "Not yet. Elias, the church first. Something I need to do." She understood. Together, with Brennan and his men flanking them, they made their way through the growing crowd. Word spread quickly. Ben Morrison was dead. The pastor's widow had returned. The truth would finally be told. The church ruins stood as they'd left them, blackened timbers reaching toward the sky like accusing fingers. Elias insisted on walking to where the altar had stood, though each step cost him. "This is where he died?" he asked. "Yes." He removed his hat, stood silently for a moment. "I'm not a praying man, Reverend Hartley, but your wife, she's the finest woman I've ever known. You raised her right, loved her well. I promise I'll take care of her, if she'll have me, and I promise she'll never have to be that strong alone again." Miriam was crying openly now. "Samuel would have liked you. He always said God works through imperfect vessels. Doesn't get much more imperfect than me. Perfect enough." The crowd had followed them, keeping a respectful distance. Among them, a young minister stepped forward. Morrison had barred him from the town, but news of the man's death had traveled fast.
Mrs. Hartley, I'm Reverend Douglas. I've come to reclaim the church, such as it is.
Your husband's work will continue, she smiled through her tears.
He'd be glad, and if I might—
Mr. Gray appears to need immediate attention. Elias had gone dangerously pale, leaning heavily on Miriam now. The adrenaline that had carried him this far was fading, leaving only pain and blood loss. Now the doctor, Miriam said firmly. They half carried him to the doctor's office, where the wound was cleaned and stitched. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing anything vital, but he'd lost considerable blood. He needs rest, the doctor pronounced. Lots of it. He'll get it, Miriam promised. As Elias drifted in and out of consciousness over the next days, Miriam rarely left his side. The town underwent its own healing with Morrison dead and his crimes exposed. People began to speak freely again. The newspaper ran Samuel's story on the front page. The governor sent marshals to investigate. It was a week before Elias woke fully, finding Miriam asleep in a chair beside his bed, her hand clasping his. He squeezed gently, and her eyes flew open. You're awake. Apparently, did we win? Morrison's dead. His men are scattered or arrested. The truth is out. She smiled, exhausted but triumphant. Samuel has justice. And you, what do you have? She leaned forward, kissed him softly. Everything I need, if you'll still have me. Woman, I got shot for you. I think that indicates a certain level of commitment. She laughed, the sound like music after so much darkness. Is that a yes to Oregon? That's a yes to anywhere you want to go. Brennan visited later that day, hat in hand. Well, you survived, both of you, against all odds. Tom, I owe you— Nothing. We're square. All debts paid. He grinned. Besides, it felt good, doing something right for once. The boys and I are thinking of going straight. Well, straighter. Good luck with that. You too. Elias, you've got a second chance here. Don't waste it. After he left, Miriam helped Elias sit up, propping pillows behind him. The minister, Reverend Douglas, he offered to marry us. When you're healed, of course. Trying to make an honest man of me? Something like that. She grew serious. I know it's soon after Samuel, and people will talk. Let them. He caught her hand. I spent 3 years hiding from the world because I cared too much what people thought, what they knew about me. I'm done hiding. Then you'll marry me? Miriam Hartley. I'll marry you tomorrow if this sawbones would let me out of bed. She kissed him again, longer this time, full of promise and hope and all the tomorrows stretching ahead. 2 weeks later, they stood in the rebuilt section of the church where Samuel had once preached. The wedding was simple. Miriam wore a borrowed dress, Elias his cleanest shirt. Brennan stood as witness, along with half the town who'd come to see the pastor's widow marry the man who'd helped bring her justice. Do you take this woman? Reverend Douglas asked. I do, Elias said, his voice strong and certain. Do you take this man? I do, Miriam replied, her eyes shining. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. As they kissed, sealing their union. Snow began to fall outside the church windows, but inside was warmth and light and the promise of new beginnings. Ready for Oregon, Mrs. Gray? Elias whispered as they turned to face their guests. Ready for anything, Mr. Gray. They walked down the aisle together, past the place where Samuel had died, out into the snow-kissed afternoon. The past would always be with them, the gunfighter and the widow, bound by loss and redeemed by love. But the future stretched ahead, bright with possibility. As they climbed into the wagon loaded with their few possessions, Miriam looked back one last time at the church, at the town, at all they were leaving behind. No regrets? Elias asked. None. Samuel used to say God closes doors so he can open windows. She smiled at her new husband. I think you were my window. And you were mine. They drove out of Deadwood as the snow continued to fall, heading west toward Oregon and whatever adventures awaited. Behind them, the church bells rang, celebrating not just a wedding but a victory of love over hate, justice over corruption, and hope over despair. The widowmaker was dead, buried with the pastor and the corrupt businessman who destroyed so many lives. In his place rode Elias Gray, husband, protector, and partner to a woman who'd taught him that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. And as the mountains gave way to valleys and the snow turned to rain, they faced the future as they'd learned to face everything else, together, unafraid, and finally, truly alive. The letter from Deadwood arrived on a crisp autumn morning, a full year after Elias and Miriam had settled in Oregon's Willamette Valley. Elias was mending a fence when he saw the rider approaching their small farm. An old instincts made his hand drift toward where his gun used to rest, but he wore no gun now, hadn't in months. "Letter for Elias Gray," the rider announced. Producing an envelope bearing official seals, Miriam emerged from the house, flour dusting her apron, concern creasing her brow as Elias opened the letter. His face darkened as he read.
"What is it?"
she asked after the rider departed. "Morrison had brothers. They're claiming his death was murder, demanding I stand trial." He handed her the letter. "The territorial judge wants me back in Deadwood." She read quickly, her expression hardening.
"This is revenge, nothing more. Everyone knows what Morrison did.
Knowing and proving in court are different things, especially when the accused is the widowmaker." She flinched at the old name. They'd built a new life here, as Mr. and Mrs. Gray. Farmers who kept to themselves but were slowly earning their neighbors' respect. Elias had become known for his way with horses and his willingness to help during harvest. Miriam taught Sunday school at the local church and had started a small school for minors' children. "You can't go back," she said firmly. "If I don't, they'll send marshals, bounty hunters. Our life here will be over. Then we'll go somewhere else. California. Maybe. Or no." He cupped her face gently. "No more running. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, of wondering when the past will find us. If I face this now, maybe we can finally be free. Or you'll hang for defending yourself and protecting me. Maybe."
"But hiding isn't living. Miriam, you taught me that."
She pulled away, pacing the porch they'd built together.
"I won't lose you. Not now. Not when—"
She trailed off, but he caught her meaning. Her hand had gone unconsciously to her belly, still flat but carrying new life. They'd only been certain for a week. "All the more reason to settle this," he said quietly. "I won't have our child growing up with a father who's always looking for the law. And if the law is unjust, if Morrison's money buys your conviction even from the grave, then I'll face that too, but I won't run anymore." They argued for 3 days. Miriam proposed wild schemes, fleeing to Canada, changing their names again, disappearing into the wilderness. But Elias remained resolute. On the 4th morning, she found him in the barn, oiling the guns he'd stored away. "If you're going, I'm going with you," she announced. "Miriam, no arguments. We face things together. Remember? That was our promise." "You're pregnant." "I'm aware. I was also shot at, threatened, and nearly strangled last year. I survived all that. I can survive a courtroom." He knew that tone. There'd be no changing her mind. "All right, but we do this smart. I'll write Tom Brennan, see if he and the boys can meet us there, and we'll need a good lawyer." "I know one," she said. "Charles Whitfield in Portland. He helped some of the mining families fight the company. He's expensive, but honest." "How do you know him?" "He attends the church where I teach. His daughter is one of my students." She managed a small smile. "I've been saving money from the teaching. We can afford him." 2 weeks later, they set out for Deadwood. The journey that had once taken them through blizzards and danger now passed in relative comfort, riding a stagecoach with other travelers. Miriam fought morning sickness while Elias watched the landscape roll by. each mile taking them closer to a reckoning he'd hoped to avoid. They stopped in Portland first, where Charles Whitfield agreed to take the case after hearing their story. "Self-defense is clear," he said, reviewing the newspaper accounts Miriam had saved. "But the Morrison family has influence. They're painting you as a hired killer who murdered their brother for his money." "I never took a cent from Morrison," Elias said. "No, but your past. It will be used against you. Every man you've killed, every job you've taken. They'll make you seem like a rabid dog who needs putting down. And Miriam," Whitfield glanced at her, "they'll try to destroy her credibility. A woman who took up with her husband's killer mere weeks after his death. They'll make her sound like, forgive me, Mrs. Gray, but they'll make you sound like a woman of loose morals who conspired in murder." "Let them try," Miriam said fiercely. The lawyer studied them both. "There's another option. You could leave the country. I have contacts who could arrange passage to Australia or Argentina. Start completely fresh." "No," Elias said. "We stand and fight, in court this time." Whitfield nodded slowly. "Then we'd best prepare for war." They arrived in Deadwood to find the town transformed. New buildings had sprung up where ruins once stood. The church had been rebuilt, grander than before, but beneath the prosperity. Elias sensed the old tensions. Morrison's legacy lived on in the men who'd worked for him, in the businesses he'd controlled. Tom Brennan met them at the hotel. "Figured you'd be back eventually, though I hoped you'd have more sense." "How bad is it?" Elias asked. "Bad enough. Morrison's brothers, William and James, they've been spreading money around, buying witnesses, making promises. Half the town thinks you're a hero. The other half's been convinced you're the devil himself. And Judge Harper claims he's impartial. But his campaign for the state judiciary was funded by Morrison interests." Tom shook his head. "You should have stayed in Oregon." "Probably, but I'm here now." Miriam had been quiet throughout the exchange, but now she spoke up. "I need to visit the church and Samuel's grave. I'll come with you." Elias said, "No, this is something I need to do alone." He didn't like it, but understood. As she left, Tom studied his old friend. "She's showing the baby. Barely. Enough that people will notice. They'll use it against you both. I know. And you're still going through with this? What would you do, Tom, if it was your family, your future?" Brennan was quiet for a moment. "Same as you, I suppose. Fight till the end." The trial began 3 days later. The courtroom was packed, people standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. Elias sat beside Whitfield, acutely aware of the hostile stares from Morrison's brothers in the front row. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Dalton, painted a damning picture. Elias Gray, known throughout the territories as the Widowmaker, a man who's killed for money more times than anyone can count. He came to Deadwood with violence in his heart and murder on his mind. "Objection," Whitfield said calmly. "The defendant's past is not on trial. It speaks to character, Your Honor," Dalton countered. "I'll allow it." Judge Harper ruled, and so it went. Witness after witness testified to Elias's reputation, his deadly skills, the fear he inspired. Some were clearly bought, but others spoke from genuine memory of the man he'd been. When Miriam took the stand, Dalton attacked immediately. "Mrs. Gray, or should I say Mrs. Hartley, you were married before, were you not?" "My husband was murdered," she said steadily. "Yes, and how convenient that his killer removed the only obstacle to your current marriage. Tell me, when did your relationship with the defendant begin?" "After he saved my life." "How romantic. A widow and her savior. Some might say suspiciously romantic, given how quickly you forgot your vows to your dead husband." "Objection." Whitfield stood. "Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, Mr. Dalton. Keep to the facts." But the damage was done by the time Miriam finished testifying. Dalton had painted her as a calculating woman who'd used Elias to eliminate Morrison and clear the way for their relationship. That night, in their hotel room, Miriam wept angry tears. They made me sound like a harlot, like I wanted Samuel dead. The jury saw the truth, Elias said, though he wasn't sure they had. Did they? Or did they see what Dalton wanted them to see? He held her close, feeling the slight swell of her belly where their child grew. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You might hang. I might. But I won't die a coward, and our child won't grow up with a father who ran from justice. Justice! She laughed bitterly. Where's the justice for Samuel, for all Morrison's victims? We gave them that, in the only way we could. The trial continued for a week. Whitfield presented a strong defense, bringing witnesses who testified to Morrison's crimes, to the threat against Miriam, to the necessity of Elias's actions. The newspaper editor, John Whitman, presented Samuel's journals as evidence, but for every witness who supported them, Dalton produced two who muddied the waters. By the time closing arguments came, Elias could read the jury's faces. They were torn, uncertain. Gentlemen of the jury, Whitfield began. You've heard a great deal about Elias Gray's past, but this trial is about one day, one moment, when a corrupt man who'd murdered a minister tried to silence the only witness, Mr. Gray acted as any man would to protect an innocent woman. That Morrison died is justice, not murder. Dalton's closing was equally passionate. Don't be fooled by this tale of heroism. Elias Gray is a professional killer who saw an opportunity. He eliminated Ben Morrison not to protect anyone, but because Morrison stood in the way of what he wanted. The woman, the money, the power. Find him guilty, or the next killer who comes to town will think he too can act as judge, jury, and executioner. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Elias spent them in his cell, allowed only brief visits from Miriam and Whitfield. On the second night, Miriam brought news. There's been a development. One of Morrison's former men, Pete Hawkins, wants to testify. He says he has information about the church fire. Why now? He's dying. Consumption. Says he wants to clear his conscience. The next morning, Judge Harper reluctantly allowed Hawkins to testify. The man was skeletal, coughing blood into a handkerchief, but his voice was clear as he spoke. I was there when Morrison ordered the church burned. Heard him say Pastor Hartley had to die for interfering. Saw him laugh when they dragged the pastor inside. He looked at Morrison's brothers. Your brother was a killer and a coward. Gray did what any decent man would do. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harper gavelled for order as Dalton objected furiously. But the damage to the prosecution's case was done. When the jury returned an hour later, Elias stood to face them. We find the defendant not guilty of murder, the foreman announced, on the grounds of justifiable homicide in defense of another. Miriam's sob of relief was drowned out by the chaos that followed. Morrison's brothers stormed out, shouting about corruption and bought justice. Their supporters followed, while others cheered the verdict. Outside the courthouse, as Elias breathed free air for the first time in days, William Morrison confronted them. This isn't over, he snarled. You killed my brother. There'll be a reckoning. Your brother killed innocent people, Miriam said, stepping forward despite Elias's restraining hand. He got the reckoning he deserved. Whore, William spat. You and your bastard child. Elias moved faster than he had in a year, his fist connecting with William's jaw. The man went down hard, and Elias stood over him, the old dangerous light in his eyes. You come near my wife or child, and what I did to your brother will seem merciful. That's not a threat. It's a promise. Tom Brennan and his men materialized from the crowd, hands on their weapons. William scrambled up, backed away with his supporters. We're leaving town, Elias announced loudly enough for all to hear. Going back to Oregon to farm in peace. Anyone who follows us will be buried there. He looked directly at Morrison's brothers. Let this end here. 2 days later, they departed Deadwood for the final time. At the edge of town, Miriam asked to stop at the cemetery. She knelt at Samuel's grave, which now bore a proper headstone. We did it, she whispered. You have justice. Samuel, rest in peace. Elias helped her to her feet. As they walked back to the wagon, She took his arm. Do you think they'll come after us? Maybe, but Tom and some of the boys are riding to Oregon too. They've decided to try farming. He smiled slightly. We'll have neighbors who know how to handle trouble. A community of former gunfighters turned farmers. What could go wrong? They laughed, the tension of recent weeks finally breaking. As Deadwood disappeared behind them, Miriam leaned against Elias's shoulder. What are you thinking about? The future, he said. Our child. Teaching him or her to ride, to read, to be better than we were. We're already better than we were. Both of us. Think Samuel would approve of us? Of this life we're building? I think, Miriam said slowly, Samuel would be glad that love found a way, that even in darkness, grace prevailed. They rode on through the afternoon sun, toward home and the life they'd fought so hard to claim. Behind them, the past grew smaller with each mile. Ahead, Oregon waited with its green valleys and promise of peace. The Widowmaker was truly dead now, buried in a Deadwood courtroom alongside the last of Morrison's evil. In his place rode Elias Gray, farmer, husband, soon-to-be father, a man who'd learned that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in facing death, but in choosing life. As they made camp that first night, Miriam felt the baby move for the first time. She grabbed Elias's hand, placed it on her belly. Feel that? His eyes widened with wonder. Is that our future? She said, kicking its way into the world. He held her close under the vast expanse of stars, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. From ashes and death had come love and new life. From an ending had come a beginning. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For not giving up on me, for seeing something worth saving. Thank you, she whispered back, for being worth saving. They held each other as the fire burned low. Two souls who'd found redemption in the most unlikely place, each other's arms. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight there was only peace, promise, and the certainty that whatever came next, they would face it as they'd learned to face everything. Together, the cabin stood exactly where they'd built it 5 years ago, but everything else had changed. What had once been wilderness was now a small community. Tom Brennan's place sat a quarter-mile east, Jake's cabin visible across the meadow. Other former gunmen had followed, drawn by the promise of peace and the protection of numbers. They called their settlement Haven, though the irony wasn't lost on any of them. Elias stood on the porch, watching his daughter chase chickens around the yard. Emma was 4 now, with her mother's amber eyes and stubborn streak. She squealed with laughter as a rooster evaded her grasp, her dark hair flying wild in the spring breeze. Emma Grace Gray, you leave those chickens be, Miriam called from the garden, though her stern tone was betrayed by the smile tugging at her lips. But, Mama, I'm helping. Those chickens don't need that kind of help. Elias descended the steps, scooped his daughter up, and set her on his shoulders. Come on, little one. Let's check the horses instead. Can I ride Snowball? If your mother says yes. Mama always says yes when you ask. Emma observed with 4-year-old wisdom. Smart girl, he murmured, carrying her toward the barn. The peace of the morning shattered with the sound of approaching riders. Old instincts flared. Elias counted 3 horses, moving fast. His hand moved to his hip, finding only empty air. The gun stayed locked in a chest these days, brought out only for hunting or predator control. But as the riders drew closer, tension eased. He recognized Tom Brennan's distinctive hat, and beside him rode Jake and a stranger. Uncle Tom, Emma squealed, wriggling to get down. Brennan dismounted, catching the little girl as she ran to him. Hello there, princess. You keeping your PA in line? Papa doesn't need keeping in line, Emma informed him seriously. Mama says he's remarkably well behaved for a reformed desperado. Jake snorted with laughter while Elias shook his head. You shouldn't repeat everything you hear, little one. Why not? Because some things are meant for grown-up ears. Miriam joined them, wiping her hands on her apron. Her pregnancy showed more this time. 6 months along with their second child. Tom, Jake, who's your friend? The stranger stepped forward. A young man with the worn clothes of a drifter but intelligent eyes. Name's Matthew Carson. Ma'am, I've come looking for Elias Gray. Elias tensed. And why would you be looking for me? Because I need to learn what you know, how to shoot, how to survive, how to protect what matters. I'm a farmer now. You want a gunfighter? You've come to the wrong place. No, sir, I haven't. Matthew's voice carried desperate conviction. My family has a spread down in California. Cattle baron named Dutton wants our land. Already killed my brother when he wouldn't sell. I need to learn to fight back, or we'll lose everything. Go to the law, Elias said flatly. Dutton owns the law, just like Morrison owned it here. The young man's eyes flickered to Miriam. I read about what you did, Mr. Gray, how you stood up to corruption. I need that kind of courage. What you need is to take your family and run, find somewhere else to farm. Would you run if someone threatened your family? Emma, who'd been listening with the intense focus children brought to adult conversations, piped up. Papa doesn't run from anything. He's the bravest man in the whole world. Emma, go help your mother with lunch, Elias said quietly. But Papa, go on now. As Miriam led Emma away, promising cookies if she helped properly. Tom Brennan studied the young man. How old are you, boy? 22. Same age Elias was when he started down this road. You sure you want to follow that path? I want to protect my family, whatever that takes. Jake spat tobacco juice. Every man who ever picked up a gun said the same thing. Most of them are dead now. Then teach me to be one who isn't. Elias was already shaking his head when Miriam returned, without Emma but with steel in her eyes. Teach him, she said simply. Miriam, you heard his story. It's Morrison all over again. Would you have us turn our backs? It's not our fight. When is it ever? She faced him squarely, one hand on her pregnant belly. We have peace here because you fought for it, because you knew how to fight for it. Would you deny another family that same chance? I'm not a teacher. You taught me, every day in that cabin. You taught me to survive, to fight, to stand up for myself. She looked at Matthew. How long would you need him? Just a month, ma'am, long enough to learn the basics. You can't learn what you need in a month. Elias said harshly. It takes years to develop the skills, and by then you've become something else, something harder. Ask Tom, ask Jake, ask any of us who've walked that road. I'm not asking to become a gunfighter, Matthew said. I'm asking to learn enough to protect my home. There's a difference. Is there? Elias turned away, staring at the mountains. Once you kill a man, you're a killer. Doesn't matter why you did it. That's what you become. You're not a killer. Emma's voice came from the doorway where she'd been eavesdropping. You're my papa. You read stories and fix broken things and make Mama laugh. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind through the trees. Finally, Elias sighed deeply. 1 week, he said. I'll teach you basics for 1 week. How to draw, how to aim, how not to get killed. But Matthew, if you can find another way, any other way, take it. This path leads nowhere good. 1 week is all I ask, Matthew said gratefully. Tom Brennan clapped the young man on the shoulder. You'll bunk with me. Elias teaches better when he can go home to his family at night. Keeps him human. As the men dispersed to tend to various tasks, Miriam slipped her hand into Elias's. You're doing the right thing. Am I? Teaching another young man to kill? Teaching him to protect what he loves. There's a difference, even if you can't see it anymore. I see too much. That's the problem. He pulled her close. What if he becomes like I was? What if he becomes like you are? She countered. A man who uses his strength to protect, not destroy. Who knows when to fight and when to walk away? Who found love worth living for instead of causes worth dying for? That evening, as they sat down to dinner, Emma chattered about her day while secretly feeding scraps to the dog under the table. It was beautifully ordinary, a scene repeated in countless homes, made precious by how hard-won their peace had been. After Emma was tucked into bed with 3 stories and countless delays, Elias found Miriam on the porch, knitting tiny clothes by lamplight. "Boy or girl, do you think?" she asked as he settled beside her. "Doesn't matter, long as they're healthy. Emma wants a sister, says boys are too rough." Where'd she get that idea? From watching Tom and Jake argue over fence lines. She smiled, though she also said if it's a boy, she'll teach him to be gentle like Papa. Gentle, not a word many would use for me. No, the man who holds his daughter through nightmares, who tends injured animals with infinite patience, who touches me like I'm something precious. She set aside her knitting. "You're the gentlest man I know, Elias Gray. Gentle in the way only someone who understands violence can be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Then Miriam spoke again. "I've been thinking about Samuel lately." Elias tensed slightly. "Oh? Not like that. Just wondering what he'd think of all this. Our life here, Emma, the new baby." She took his hand. "I think he'd be happy. Happy that love found me again, that good came from such darkness." "You really believe that?" "I do. Samuel believed in redemption, in second chances. He would have liked you. I think, would have seen the good in you that I see. Even knowing what I was, especially knowing what you were, and what you chose to become instead." The next morning, Matthew's training began. Elias started with basics: how to stand, how to breathe, how to see danger before it saw you. The young man was eager but clumsy, fumbling with the weight of the gun, jerking the trigger instead of squeezing. "You're thinking too much," Elias told him after another missed shot. "Stop trying to be fast. Be smooth. Speed comes from efficiency, not haste. How do you not think? When someone's trying to kill you, you practice until it's instinct, until your body knows what to do without your mind getting in the way." He demonstrated, drawing and firing in one fluid motion, the bottle 20 yards away exploding. "But that takes time you don't have. Then what do? You learn to be smart instead of fast, to see trouble coming, to position yourself with advantages, to talk when others would shoot." Elias reloaded his weapon. The best gunfighters are the ones who rarely have to draw. Day by day, Matthew improved. Not enough to face a real gunman, but enough that he might survive long enough to find another solution. Elias taught him more than shooting: how to read men's eyes, how to spot an ambush, how to project confidence even when terrified. On the 4th day, Emma escaped her mother's watchful eye and found them at the makeshift range. "Papa, can I try?" "Absolutely not." "But you're teaching him." "He's older and has need. You're 4 and have cookies to help bake." "I don't want to bake cookies. I want to learn to shoot like you." Elias knelt to her level. "Emma, why would you want that?" "So I can protect people. Like you protected Mama." The words hit him like a physical blow. He gathered his daughter close. "Listen to me, little one. The best way to protect people is with kindness, with wisdom, with love. Guns are a last resort. When all else fails, you understand?" "I think so." "Good. Now go help your mother. And Emma, I'm proud that you want to protect others. Just remember, there are many ways to be strong." She scampered off, and Matthew watched her go. "She's lucky to grow up with peace, to have parents who'll fight to preserve it." "Every child should have that." Elias said, "That's worth fighting for. Just remember, the fighting is a means, not an end. Don't let it consume you." On the 7th day, as Matthew's training concluded, riders appeared on the horizon. Not the desperate gallop of trouble, but the purposeful approach of men with business to conduct. Elias recognized the lead rider, William Morrison. "Get inside," he told Matthew quietly. "This is my past coming to call." But Matthew stood his ground as Morrison and 2 men dismounted. The years hadn't been kind to Morrison. He'd grown gaunt, his eyes hollow with spent rage. "Gray," he said simply. "Morrison, you're a long way from Deadwood. I've come to end this. But not how you think." He pulled a paper from his coat. "I'm dying. Doctor says I've got months at best. My brother James died last winter. There's no one left to carry the hatred.
Then why come here?
Because I needed to see, to understand. His gaze traveled to the cabin, where Miriam stood in the doorway. You killed my brother for her. I killed your brother because he was a murderer who wouldn't stop.
I know that now. Always knew it, I suppose. But blood makes you blind. Morrison coughed, a harsh sound. I spent 5 years planning revenge. Hired men to track you, but they all came back with the same story. Elias Gray the farmer, Elias Gray the family man, Elias Gray who helps his neighbors and raises a little girl who calls him Papa.
What do you want, Morrison?
Peace, before I die. I want peace.
He held out the paper. This clears any claim against you. Legal document, witnessed and filed. Whatever happened in Deadwood stays buried there. Elias took the paper, scanned it. It was legitimate. A formal declaration that no Morrison would seek retribution against Elias Gray or his family. Why? He asked. Because I'm tired of death following death. Because my brother would have destroyed that woman just like he destroyed that preacher. Because maybe it's time someone in the Morrison family did something decent. He turned to go, then paused. Your daughter, I saw her in town last month when you were buying supplies. She smiled at me, didn't know who I was. Just smiled because that's what she does. She smiles at everyone. Ben would have killed her too, eventually, to hurt you, to prove a point. He was that kind of man. Morrison mounted his horse with difficulty. Be grateful for your peace. Gray, you earned it in blood. But you earned it. Don't waste it. They rode away, leaving Elias holding the paper that officially ended a feud born in violence. Miriam joined him, Emma clinging to her skirts.
What did he want?
To let go, Elias said, showing her the document.
To break the cycle.
Will he? He already has. Question is whether we can. That night, Haven celebrated Matthew's departure with a communal dinner. The young man was eager to return home, armed with new knowledge but hopefully wise enough to use it sparingly. Remember what I taught you, Elias said as they shook hands.
Not just the shooting, the thinking, the watching, the knowing when not to fight. I will. And Mr. Gray, thank you. Not just for the lessons, for showing me what's possible. A man can change, can choose to be better. Don't make me regret teaching you. I'll make you proud instead. As Matthew rode away, Tom Brennan joined Elias. Think he'll make it? Maybe. He's smart enough to try talking first. That's more than we knew at his age. True enough. Speaking of talking, there's something you should know. Town council met yesterday. They want to make you sheriff. Elias laughed. A sheriff? Me? Who better? You know the law from both sides. You can handle trouble. And most important, you've got reasons to keep the peace. I'm no lawman. Tom. Neither was Samuel, but he stood for justice anyway. Maybe it's time you did too, just with a badge instead of a Bible. Elias looked back at his cabin, where Miriam was tucking Emma into bed through the window. I'll think about it. Do that. Town's growing. We'll need law eventually. Better it comes from one of us than some stranger who doesn't understand our past. Later, as Elias made his final rounds, checking locks and banking the fire, he found Emma sitting on the stairs. Can't sleep, little one. I was thinking. Dangerous habit. Papa, are you going to be sheriff?
How did you... Never mind. I don't know. What do you think? I think you'd be a good sheriff. You already protect everyone. This way you'd have a star. Is that important? The star?
It means something. Mama taught me.
Symbols matter because they remind us who we're trying to be. When did you get so wise? Tuesday. He carried her back to bed, marveling at the weight of her in his arms, the trust in her sleepy embrace. After she was settled, he found Miriam waiting in their room. Sheriff Gray, she said, trying the words, has a ring to it. You were listening. Windows are thin. She patted the bed beside her. What do you think? I think I've spent years running from the law. Seems strange to become it, or fitting. You know better than most what justice should look like, what it shouldn't. She took his hand, placed it on her belly where the baby moved. This one will be born into a proper town, with laws and schools and churches. Shouldn't their father help shape what that becomes? When you put it that way. Besides, she smiled, you already protect everyone. Might as well get paid for it. He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. From gunfighter to farmer to lawman. Not a path I expected. The best paths never are. As they lay together in the darkness, Elias thought about journeys and destinations, about the man he'd been and the man he'd become. Outside, an owl called across the valley, and from Tom's place came the faint sound of laughter. No regrets? Miriam asked, echoing a question from years before. None, he said, and meant it. You? How could I regret the path that led me here? To you, to Emma, to this. She guided his hand to where new life grew. We found each other in darkness and built something bright. That's miracle enough for any lifetime. 2 lifetimes, he corrected. The one before, and this one. No, she said firmly. Just 1 lifetime, with chapters, some darker than others, but all part of the same story. Our story. The next morning brought fresh snow, late for the season but welcome for the moisture it would bring to summer crops. Emma shrieked with delight, begging to build snow figures before breakfast, watching his daughter play while his pregnant wife cooked and his neighbors went about their peaceful business. Elias made his decision. He'd accept the sheriff position, not because he sought authority or craved the old excitement, but because peace was fragile and required guarding. He'd learned to take life. Now he'd learn to preserve it through law instead of lead. Papa, look, Emma called, pointing to her creation. It's a snow sheriff. He's protecting the Snow family. Good job, little one. Every family needs protecting. Will you protect the whole town when you're sheriff? I'll try. You don't have to try. You just have to be you. She ran to him, threw her small arms around his legs. You're already perfect at protecting. You saved Mama. And now we have our family, and everything is wonderful. From the porch, Miriam watched them with a soft smile. The sun broke through the clouds, setting the snow to sparkling like scattered diamonds. It was a perfect moment, the kind that made all the pain and struggle worthwhile. Come on, Sheriff Gray, Miriam called. Breakfast is ready, and sheriffs need to eat too. He scooped Emma up, carrying her toward the house, and the woman who'd saved him every bit as much as he'd saved her. The past would always be with them, the ghosts of Samuel and Catherine. The blood spilled and lives lost, but the future stretched ahead, bright with promise. As they gathered around the table, saying grace in their own way, Elias Gray understood that redemption wasn't a destination, but a daily choice. Every morning he woke to peace instead of violence. Every time he chose love over fear. Every gentle word to his daughter and tender touch to his wife. These were the victories that mattered. The widowmaker was dead, buried beneath years of better choices. In his place sat a farmer, a father, a husband, soon to be a sheriff, a man who'd learned that the greatest courage wasn't in facing death but in embracing life, with all its complications and possibilities. Outside, snow continued to fall on Haven, blessing the small community of former gunfighters who'd traded bullets for plowshares, violence for peace, isolation for family. It was a modest miracle. But miracles didn't have to be grand. Sometimes they were as simple as a shared meal, a child's laughter, and the promise of tomorrow. And as Miriam reached across the table to take his hand, as Emma chattered about her plans for the snow sheriff's snow deputy, as new life grew safe and protected in the warmth of their home, Elias Gray knew with certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. Home, family, haven. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story from the Wild West. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Elias and Miriam's journey. What touched your heart the most? I read every comment and would love to hear from you.